thank you very much for joining in such huge numbers. We are very interested in hearing all your opinions about what we've produced over the last couple of months with our FAIR Working Group. So, Paulina has already asked, please keep your camera off during our presentation. And keep your microphones muted. You have also seen at the top of the screen, and it has been sent in the chat for those who were early enough. There is a system from Google to answer, to ask questions to us. You can already, during the presentation, start asking your questions, adding your questions, and you can actually vote on questions posed by others. And we will address most of the questions, hopefully, in the Q&A session at the end of the topic of the webinar. If you have anything that is not content related but technical, then you can raise that through the chat, and we will be keeping an eye on that to make sure that everything works fine for you and you'll be able to follow. You can ask questions anonymously if you put your name in when you ask a question, and when your question is selected, it will be on the screen, and we may ask you to vocally also contribute. So if you really don't want to be with your name in the recorded webinar, then please keep yourself muted and pose questions anonymously. Paulina, I hope that we are actually recording already. I haven't seen the poll. I would like to confirm that.
What I see that I only can stop recording or pause stop.
Okay.
So it has to do it automatically.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
then I think we can start with the actual content. So we had the welcome remarks. We will give you a small introduction to the work. Lizzie will then take over and explain how we did our work. Then I will take over again and give a demonstration of what we produced over the last couple of months. And then Neil will take over and will be asking you for your feedback and explain what we would like to have from you. We close the session with 20 minutes question and answer. We really want to close strictly at 1500 CEST. So for the introduction, I would like to tell you that the European Open Science Cloud Governance has established a number of working groups last year. In total, at the moment, there are 6 of these working groups that have been established. Ours was one of the first 4 to be established. It's the FAIR Working Group, and these working groups have been established to actually advise the executive board on matters relating to the building of the European Open Science Cloud. Inside this FAIR Working Group, we have established 4 task forces. There were task forces for the PID policy, for interoperability, metrics and certification, and the group that you are now listening to the results. That's the group of FAIR Practice. The FAIR Practice group exclusively had been assigned a supporting role. There is no deliverable that we had to deliver to the EOSC board, but in fact the results of our work were valuable enough to actually write them up and offer them as a recommendation anyway. That's the context for our work, and now I will give the floor to Lizzie for the presentation of the methods.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Hello, everybody. So I'm happy to introduce our outcomes. As Rob said, we were supposed to be advisory. However, the work that we did ended up in a report and recommendations. So I will explain the methodology and also a little bit the limitations of our study so that you are aware when you read the report. So we have two outcomes. One is a spreadsheet, which Rob will introduce later in more details, and also a report, which we produced in June, actually a few weeks ago. So in the spreadsheet, we started for 1 year. We collected literature. We did a literature research. So we started last July in 2019 and finished just really a few weeks ago. And we organized the literature into an online spreadsheet and arranged it by academic disciplines. And so each member had to put the various resources there and then had to also go through these resources that were assigned to them. So we did a detailed analysis of these resources that we found. In addition, we had a community consultation. So we asked for experts and anybody who were willing to share their resources with us that should definitely be included in this work. After the analysis, we classified our findings into 4 different types. So we had technical solutions, social enablers, social impediments, and technical impediments. And then further on, these findings will also match to individual FAIR principles. So when you finally see the Excel, then you can see that you can actually filter them really well and find the information that you need. And then the second outcome that we have was the report. So we had a writing sprint on the 16th to 18th of June this year. And all the findings that we found are actually in the report, in addition with 7 recommendations. So this is what you can read. So now a little bit of the limitations that we had. So first of all, this is a small group. Our task force is literally a really small group. So all the categorizations and the things that we found, you have to understand this is limited because it's limited among the people that are in this group. So this is not definitely, we are not saying that this is exhaustive list. There are things out there, or there are resources out there, there are groups out there that we most likely didn't reach, or that we are not aware of. So lack of data and lack of information was one of the things that we discovered, that we really don't know what is out there. And also maybe the communities or sub-communities that are not so aware of the FAIR, they are not most likely publishing their practices or when it comes to FAIR, or also maybe they are not replying to the surveys that are out there trying to find out FAIR practices. Then also the classification, you have to be a little bit understanding that this is subjective, because one group may be under one category, but then could also fit in some other category. So this is also something to keep in mind. And also, this was literally a desk research, what we did, where we didn't go anywhere. We didn't interview any groups. This is a desk research. So the interpretations of the written text can be also subjective. But the good things about this thing is that you can help us to become better. And your input now, which is why we have this seminar today, is that you can help us overcome these limitations. So thank you, Rob. You can take it over now.
Thank you, Lizzie, for introducing this. So indeed, in the agenda, we are now going to the demonstration of the 2 outputs that Lizzie described. First, we're going for the reference list. The reference list is available on Zenodo, and you can find it under this link. When you click there, you will find that there are 2 different versions in which this document is available. It is available as a link to a Google spreadsheet, but also as an Excel that you can download and use at your own pace. The first tab of this, there are 3 tabs in this document. The first tab explains how to use it, and I will also demonstrate that here in these slides. The second tab actually shows all the documents that we have been using as input. We have studied all of these, and the ones that are labeled in blue we consider as having a lot of information about FAIR, but not about FAIR practice. And so they are not part of our final analysis. The ones that are labeled in green are actually processed and have been used as statements in our conclusions. So an example of one of the documents, there is a statement here highlighted in blue. And while reading the document, we actually try to figure out what does this statement say about this community. And we captured each of these statements and then classified them in the third tab of the document. So here you see the conclusions in this column, last column here, the text column that actually we extracted from these documents. And to be able to search through this, we had to make a classification, and we classified them by two different ways. First, we classified them of what we call a type. So that is indeed a social impediment, either a social impediment or a social enabler, something that in the community makes it more hard to become fair, or that helps people to strive for fair. And then similarly, technically, so technical impediment or technical solution, something that people ran into while trying to enable fair, or something that people developed in that community to actually make their work fair. So that's about the type. And the second classification is actually the classification along the FAIR principles. And since not all of the things we found are applicable to only one FAIR principle, here we made a hierarchy. So you can see that some things are generic, other things can be generic findability, accessibility, interoperability, or reusability related, or one of the actual FAIR principles is labeled for such effect. Now, if you look at the slide in Google as a Google document, then you can, using the data menu bar, under filter views, you can create a filter view for yourself, and you can analyze the data by actually selecting the items that you're interested to see. So here I've done that twice. You see that I've selected in the first menu the social enablers, and in the second menu everything that is related to FAIR, so generic FAIR, as well as the individual FAIR principles, FAIR 2 and FAIR 4. And when you do that, then actually the spreadsheet filters. Similarly, if you take the Excel spreadsheet, you can use under data the auto filter feature. And with the auto filter feature, you get similar menus here. So you can select the social enabler and all of the findability issues in the applicability column. And in both cases, the Google Sheet or the Excel sheet, you then actually end up with exactly those statements, and you can see how the different communities have experienced this. So of course, in the rest of the columns of the document, you can then see from which document this is actually coming, how we found this. Then we went on and we made a document out of this. The document you can also find linked from the announcement of this webinar. The DOI is given here. Again, we published it on Zenodo already as a first draft. You will, from yesterday on, find the second draft that has incorporated changes from our colleagues in work groups of the EOSC. And now we are opening this document to your consultation. It's called 7 recommendations for implementation of fair practice. The contents are in 5 different sections. So the first section is the disciplinary perspective. This actually is a summary of the spreadsheet. It describes the social problems, the social enablers, the technical problems, and the technical developments in 4 subsections, and draw some conclusions out of that. The second section of this document is the regional perspective. It analyzes and gives 8 different policy approaches that are found in Europe and outside, and analyzes the consequences of such policy approaches for the fair implementation in practice. The third section of the document addresses how FAIR actually works for non-data objects, so FAIR services, FAIR software, FAIR workflows, and FAIR for executive notebooks. And this shows definitely that it has different aspects than the much further worked out FAIR for data. The fourth section of the document describes the differences between communities and how we are, what we are seeing there and where those differences might be coming from. All of these four sections have delivered conclusions that we've written up in the form of 7 recommendations meant for the EOSC governance, so to be able to steer the EOSC into the biggest possible success. And we explain each of them with examples in this last 5th section. The 7 recommendations are listed on this slide, and actually I do not want to go into too much detail. We hope that you will be giving us feedback after reading the actual document, where you will find each of these with examples and with our reasoning on how we got there. With that, I will close this section of the presentation. We are luckily ahead of schedule, so that we'll have actually more time for the question and answers. At the moment, I want to give the floor to Neil, who will explain how and what we are expecting from you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Lisi, for introducing the work that we've been doing as part of this FAIR Practice Task Force. So we recognize that there's a lot that's going on, and this is just the first stage of the process of making these resources useful to the community. So what I'm going to describe over the next couple of slides is how we are looking to get your feedback to help improve and revise these resources. One of the challenges we have is that the FAIR Practice Working Group is a time-limited group. So what we have aimed to do is find a structure for the feedback that allows you to provide your comments, your corrections, and your additions to both the recommendations for implementation of FAIR Practice Report and also the FAIR and Practice reference list that you've seen Rob demonstrate. The way that we are primarily looking for this feedback is through the same structures and platforms that we've used to develop this. So we've been building this collaboratively over the last few months over Google Docs and Google Sheets. And what we're going to be asking you to do is to ideally provide your feedback using these 2 forms. So with the report, what we're looking for is feedback as comments in the Google Docs draft document, and this will be linked from the webinar recording and also the other pages that we'll be putting up after this presentation. And what we're looking for there is for you to read through the sections that you have an interest in, that you have contributions to, and add in comments, ideally alongside your explanation for the comments, so that we can take these into account after the deadline for feedback has closed. For the reference list, we're asking people to provide feedback via the Google Sheets version, which Rob has shown you. And here we're looking for people to both make additions to the reading list. As Lissy said, one of the limitations of this study is that we can't possibly know everything that has been done in terms of FAIR in practice that's out there. So if you think we've missed something, we'd ask you to add this to our reading list. And we'd ask you to accompany this with some sets of explanations, conclusions, recommendations that you have from your own reading of this. What we'd like you to do is provide a comment with the link to the reference, and then also a little explanation of why you think this reference is important and what fair practice you think it shows. Obviously, you can also give us comments and corrections on the existing conclusions that we have in this reference list. If you think there's something that we have misunderstood or we have missed out, then please let us know. We're also aware that not everyone likes to comment in Google, so if you would prefer to send us a comment by email, you can use the email address fair-practice@eoscsecretariat.eu, which will go to all of the members of the Fair Practice Task Force. And again, please give a little bit of the explanation behind your comments. So we really like to hear about things that we've missed out, and we'd like to hear why you think these are showing good examples of fair practice. So the deadline for all of this is the 31st of August 2020. And yes, thank you, Rob. Let's go on to the next slide. There are some things that we're really looking for in general, as well as these specific comments on things that we may have missed out. So this report in particular is primarily targeted at an audience of people involved with the European Open Science Cloud, the research funders, and policymakers. So one question that we have after you've read the report is it properly targeted to them? Are the recommendations at the right level? Are the recommendations clear for who should be taking action? And is the report itself structured in a way and a language that is suitable for these different audiences? As I've mentioned, the second thing that we're looking for is whether we've missed something. So have we missed practice from your domain? Have we missed references or important surveys, studies, or data that has come out? It may be that there's been new studies that have been published since we did the initial data gathering exercise. So please let us know about these as well. And also, have we missed out recommendations? When you look through the set of 7 recommendations, do these recommendations look like a good set to you? Are they what you think are required to ensure that the adoption of fair practice can be driven forward? And have we missed anything out? Is there anything that you think we should be doing now as a community in the short term or the medium term that should be put in as a recommendation based on the work that we've already seen? So from your knowledge as a community of fair practice, what have we forgotten in our recommendations, or what could be retargeted in our recommendations? So all of this is about understanding what we may not have captured correctly, because this has been a desk exercise and we've been working with the material that either we ourselves know or people have sent us. We will have missed things out, so this is your chance to provide us with the feedback to ensure that we capture what's happening in the community to do with FAIR, and ensure that any good practices that you or your colleagues and collaborators have developed are all included in this report and reference list. And of course, we encourage you to use this report and the reference list and to share these resources with others, hopefully making it a useful set of things for the community. All right, so now we're going to go on to the more direct way of getting feedback as part of this webinar, which is our question and answer session. So do you want to move forward to the next slide, Rob? You've seen at the top of the slides, and also Marta has helpfully been putting this into the chat, a link to the slides Q&A. So you can see there slides.app.google M44ER, all lowercase. And what will happen there is if you ask questions, you can put them in either with your name or anonymously. You can vote for questions from other people. And what we'll do is we'll go through and select questions to answer. So I'm just looking through the questions just now. And at the top there was a question around, will we make the presentation available? And yes, we'll make both the presentation available along with a recording of this webinar and also the links to the different documents and the ways to get give feedback. So I can see another anonymous question that says, is the report based on a strict interpretation of FAIR, e.g. the FAIR maturity models, FAIR data objects, or a more loose interpretation based on the researcher's understanding of FAIR? So, so answering on behalf of my colleagues, it's more the latter. So we've tried to ensure that in both the resources that we've been looking at and in the way that we've written up the report, that we take a looser interpretation so that anything which is looking to help communities adopt and put into practice some of the FAIR foundational principles will be covered in the report. However, the challenge that we have that Lucy mentioned earlier is that because of the way that we've carried out this, this work and the methodology, we may have missed things which are not explicitly labeled with FAIR, or things which it becomes harder for us to identify that they're related to FAIR. So this is part of the reason why we're looking for this feedback, because we know that there may be some things which we may have missed out, which are very much about putting FAIR into practice, but are not immediately labeled as such. Do you want to add anything to that, Lucy?
No, not really. I think you covered most of it. Rob, do you have anything?
Yeah, FAIR has had many interpretations, so even researchers' understanding of FAIR, of course, differs very much between the different communities. I think what we have tried to do is translate those into our own understanding and the understanding also in consultation with other authors of the original FAIR paper. So we try to unify the understanding so that at least the different communities, the output from the different communities have been interpreted in the same way.
All right, I see another question here from Roman David around FAIR sharing tools, FAIR data models. So, he or she asks, I don't see FAIR sharing tools, FAIR data maturity model, guidelines, RDA Shark, FAIR template, etc. in the FAIR practice Google sheet. Isn't it on the scope? So I would say here, this is a really good example of some resources that we may have missed. So it may be that either they are encompassed more generally in some of the wider topics and reports that we've looked at. Generally speaking, what we've concentrated on in the first sets of work on this is looking for reports and studies. So where we may have missed out some things are where they are specific tools which have not yet been written up. So for instance, if there has not yet been a paper or a workshop report that has come out about the use of FAIR data maturity models and their effectiveness, we may have missed this in the first round. So if you know of these sorts of things, please do add them to the spreadsheet as a comment. And we'd be particularly interested in understanding whether or not you think that these tools have worked when they've been put in place. And if you can point us to references to show examples. So that could be anything from, yes, some experience reports or studies or survey data. So I'm going to ask, because I have a name here as well, do you want to add anything to that, Roman? I'll try and unmute you.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so I have another question related with this one. Is it possible to add in your Google Sheet documents that are in other language than English?
Yes, certainly. So you can feel free to put in documents and references that are not written in the English language. We appreciate that many of the FAIR practice studies will be done at a country level or a regional level. What we would ask is that you also put in a little explanation of what is in this report in English. So a few sentences just explaining why this is a valuable document for other people who are interested in FAIR and practice to know about would be what we're asking for. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll go on to some other questions. So there's a question from Andy on GOTS on, will the report identify resources which can be used for training communities to understand and adopt FAIR? So I think this one, so this is actually possibly both the report and also the resource list. So in terms of the report, I guess we identify a lot of different resources in the report, looking at various references, various practices in terms of more generally how people are going about getting adoption of FAIR. I'm trying to find out, Lucy or Rob, particularly for your sections that you wrote in the report, are there any other pointers that you would want to give around training communities?
So I think that especially the technical difficulties can really be used to trigger training community to pick up things where training is necessary. After our group has started mid 2019, the EOSC actually has also started a working group on training. This group has started more recently than ours, and I'm sure that they will be using also our input to look at where their advice to the EOSC governance will go.
And I think also, just to sort of amplify what Rob has said, also if you're looking to find things that might be useful for your particular community, to take a look at the spreadsheet as well and have a look and see what the technical impediments and also social impediments are that have been identified by others, and see whether there's a cross section between the types of impediments and also the domain that you may be trying to work in as a training provider. Okay.
Can I add something to this thing? Some of the resources that I looked through, they did have like an open science training, and it did touch the FAIR. So I think there are various either libraries or universities they are teaching FAIR in some level, but since we were looking specifically the practice in communities or subject fields, then not all of these trainings were not included in there, which is the reason why some of the trainings may be left out.
Andy,
this touches on something else interesting, of course, that some of our documents actually predate the FAIR principles.
Yeah.
What we've seen is that they often still describe FAIR practice. So this is some part of the translation that we have done from the interpretation in the documents to the FAIR principles, because those have still counted towards our recommendations.
Okay. Andy, do you have anything else that you wanted to add, or give an example of what you're seeking to get from the report from your own personal perspective here?
I think I was in the beginning, from the title, I thought the report would actually produce the training material or how to implement FAIR, but it seems like it's more a catalog of what is being done by the others to implement FAIR. And so what I was looking for is, we want to train PhD students how to adopt, what is FAIR and how they can best make use of it and use it in their science. So I think what Leslie said was some of these things I found from the the European PhD training program. What is it called? UDoc or something now? I forget. And there seems to be stuff which we would then adapt to what is specific to our community.
Yeah, and I think we should make it clear that what we've been doing here is looking at creating resources that point to how other people are putting FAIR into practice, finding out how effective that has been, so that you can understand what is the sort of state of the art just now. But what we're not doing is providing explicitly a set of materials that you can then go on and use. We're pointing to other people who have done this, and potentially that is something that the EOSC training working group might be looking at in more detail. I don't actually have the details of this, and I don't know if there's someone from that working group who's available to answer. Okay, let's go on to the next question. So there's a question from JT Minion saying, any reflections on international aspects of where publications are coming from or interpretations of FAIR? I saw a few resources on the list from the Global South, but I'm curious what the wider situation might be. So for my colleagues who are looking more at the international and regional aspects, do you want to comment?
So I did the policy part, and so our basis was in Europe, but just to have a touch of some of the things that we saw out there specific in FAIR, these were added in the report. But no, we did not look at the global view of the FAIR in practice. Not this time.
Do you want to add anything to that, Rob?
No, so except that, of course, our assignment was to advise the European Open Science Cloud. So this is by nature a European project. Of course, many of the disciplinary groups are international and are not limited to the European continent. So where things have come from, for instance, ESFRI's, of course, the European perspective is dominating, but definitely for other fields where collaborations are predominantly worldwide, there has been input from how things are implemented in other continents as well. So I think that's there is some perspective. We are definitely interested if there are things that we missed about how things are being implemented in other continents, or problems that are encountered in other continents that would be interesting for us to know. We don't think that the European Open Science Cloud, which famously has been said by Barend Mons, who has been involved from quite the beginning, that it should not be European, it should not be open, it should not be science, and it should not be a cloud. It definitely doesn't obey the borders of the European Union, although it is currently being run as an initiative in Europe. But in the end, we think that it should be a worldwide set of standards that help exchange of progress in science-based research worldwide, and not only in the sciences, but definitely in every field of research. And as said, it shouldn't be only a cloud. So yes, we are very interested in international perspectives as well.
Okay. Thank you for all the questions that are coming in. If we don't manage to get round to all of the questions, we will aim to address any that we've missed out in a blog post following this. So if we don't manage to get round to your questions, we do hope to give you answers to them. So I'm going to go on to the next question here by Ilona von Steen. The 7 recommendations. Is the order of them on purpose or random? And for this, I might ask my colleague Marta, if she's there, to answer that as the person who ordered those. So
Okay, I'm unmuted. I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you, Ilona, for that question. Indeed, when we were preparing the recommendation, we were trying to think about the process, like in terms of first, you have to engage with communities, understand the practices in order to develop best practices. So we started from practice and we're trying to go all the way through the policies. But sometimes indeed, some of those processes happen in parallel. So while we try to aim from practice to policy recommendations, then indeed you might argue which one of those should happen first. So if you have any suggestions or strong preferences that one of the recommendations should go before the other, those kind of remarks will be, of course, also very welcome.
Thank you very much, Marta. I hope that answered your question, Ilona. Okay, so looking down the questions as well, there's a question from S. Venkataraman saying, will there be a version of the report aimed at the research community in general? So here I will defer to the Fair Practice Task Force co-chairs, Rob and Marta.
The assignment for us was to advise the European Open Science Cloud, but we are very much collaborating with a project, an EOSC project called FAIR is FAIR. And the FAIR is FAIR deliverables are often very much in line with the kind of work we have done here. And FAIR is FAIR is also delivering for researchers and for the research community in general. So I think a lot of the information that you will find in our recommendation to the EOSC, you will find similar or translated in for instance, FAIR is FAIR, or in the regional EOSC projects as deliverables for the research community as a whole.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Rob. I'm just kind of, I'm playing around with an interface so that I can see what's been top voted. So there is a question from an anonymous person at 1:32 p.m. about talking about challenges. Can you highlight a couple of researcher-specific challenges in FAIR practice from your current work in the task force of the FAIR Working Group? So here, maybe what we can do is each of the three of us can highlight one researcher-specific challenge that we saw from the parts of the report that we authored. Who wants to go first? I guess I should probably go first, given that I sprung this on you all. So I was the person who was coordinating the chapter in the report which was on FAIR for other types of research objects, so principally software, services, workflows, executable notebooks. And here, in terms of researcher-specific challenges, there were a few that had been identified by some of the things that had been reported in the practice. So a lot of them are not specific just to the researcher, but they are things that researchers are faced with when trying to do something. So for instance, one challenge that a lot of researchers see is that it's very difficult to ensure that metadata around software that they produce, if they're trying to make it fair, is easily transferred between the different systems that they might be working with. So if they're submitting a paper and they're trying to make their software reference from the paper, ideally you'd create that metadata once, and then it would be picked up by all of the different systems from publishers, from code development platforms, and so on, from repositories. But at present, because FAIR for software is still quite in its infancy, sometimes that metadata either is corrupted or is not passed on between the systems, and so you have to do manual editing. So it's a researcher-specific challenge, but it's possibly not one that researchers themselves can solve. And I think from a lot of the things that were highlighted in the section I was editing, that's the case, that it is the infrastructures and platforms that need to be adapted to ensure that researchers don't face these kind of technical impediments. So I'll go on to Rob next.
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen that is posing a lot of difficulty is the word metadata. The FAIR principles in many cases say things about metadata, where the meta is between brackets. So you should, for instance, have a persistent identifier for the data as well as for the metadata. But what is actually metadata is posing a lot of questions for people. And I think the word, as data scientists, should banish the word metadata and just explain what kind of documentation for data is necessary, and that metadata actually consists of many different aspects of documentation that is all required for the data in the end to become fair. Because for findability, for reusability, and for interoperability, all different kinds of metadata are actually needed. And Lizzie, do you have another one?
Yeah, yes, I would like to take it a little bit broader view of this thing. I think one of the things that that I faced in most of the things that I read was that I don't think that researchers, or in general, like universities or research groups, think about that this is what we are doing is fair, or if it's not fair. They are not really thinking about the FAIR principles. So for us to the job was in a way difficult because we had to look into FAIR in practice. But if people are not identifying this thing, so I think that's where we need to start, is that the FAIR itself as a term is not as common among the researchers as it is maybe among these people who are doing policies or in European Commission. So that was the one thing. And the other thing that I noticed was also that there is a lot of information out there, and I think researchers are having difficulty to choose. One thing is their repositories or infrastructure. Where do I put these things? Do I need to put my things in places that are officially called FAIR? Why should I put even my things into repositories that are called FAIR, and things like that? So I think there's a lot of kind of like confusion, which may be difficult for researchers because they already have their own work, and now they have to start thinking about this FAIR that is coming from somewhere. So these were like more broader things. I don't know if they are necessarily researcher specific, but I think this is one of the things that, in addition to the work that the researcher has to face nowadays.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you, Rob. I'm just going to cover a few of the short questions near the end from some of the anonymous submitters. So there's a question from anonymous 142. So if a FAIR tool has been created, developed, but not used in practice, then this tool will not be included in your reference list. So in general, it would not be included in the reference list, but it may be referred to in some of the other things that are in the reference list, or it may be referred to in the report itself. So in the report, it goes a little bit wider and includes references to things which have been created, which we might expect to see helping adoption of FAIR practice, but where there may not be yet data about the effectiveness of that tool. Whereas the reference list itself, it may be included, but we've only gone on to the further analysis and the ability to filter what we think the conclusions are on things which have been used in practice, because we are the FAIR in practice task force rather than the wider FAIR working group. So there's another question from Anonymous saying, it is interesting that you've included docs that predate the FAIR principles. Is there a way to filter to give results related to these docs only? Initially, I thought, yes, there is, because we captured the date of the study in the reference list. I now realize that when we captured the date of the study, we've maybe not done it in as tidy a data way as we could have. So the answer just now is no, except for a manual filter. We may want to revise this or take a look and see how we can encapsulate the dates of the studies in a way that makes it easier for you to to be able to do this. So apologies for that, but that's a really good bit of feedback, and we'll look into seeing whether we can revise the reference list. Okay, so I think we're coming near to time, so I'm going to take one last question here, which is the one from Marjan Grootveldt. So skimming the recommendations, I think that you set much store by communities, which makes good sense, yet the recommendations address EOSC governance. What do you see as effective channels between these kinds of stakeholders? So here again, I will defer to Rob and Marta as the co-chairs of the group. What are your thoughts on this?
So indeed, we have used input from the communities because it is the communities that actually put FAIR into practice. But yes, we have an assignment to deliver our recommendations to the EOSC in order for the EOSC to learn from current practice and how policy in different regions actually affects that practice, to see how the EOSC can make sure that the best possible practice prevails. Research infrastructures, of course, are the implementations of those communities. So many of the communities that we've actually addressed are represented by research infrastructures, by, for instance, the ESFRI infrastructures. So I think they are among indeed the right kind of stakeholders to follow that. Of course, there are also the projects. So these research infrastructures are also working together in EOSC projects, discipline by discipline, and also these projects help to establish this connection continuously, also when we have done our work and dissolved. And Marta, you want to add something?
Yeah, I realize the time, so just very quickly, but indeed in the report we explain different stories and also different practices within communities. There are some communities which sometimes have very strong governance within them, like for example astronomy, where development of such common practices and standard happens quite easily. But there are also some other communities where such governance does not exist, or communities have to get together to get those practices sorted. And we try to make some recommendations for the EOSC. EOSC is one of the stakeholders, but also policymaker, research funders, what they can do to stimulate those kind of efforts within the communities. Of course, not every community will be part of big infrastructure projects or big European projects. That's also something that needs to be recognized. So for example, we think in here that incentives such as financial incentives, we also mentioned one example from wind energy discipline where financial instruments from the European Commission stimulated such community activity to create governance which help development of standards, or rewards and recognitions for those who drive such community activities. So I think there are lots of tools that EOSC policymakers and research funders can really implement to help communities to put those to put FAIR principles into practice.
Okay, thank you, Marta. Thank you, Rob. And that wraps up the Q&A because we're nearly out of time. So I will say my thanks for all of the wonderful questions that you gave us, and hand back over to now Lucy and Rob to say their thank yous as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating, for a very engaging discussion and many questions. Some of the questions indeed have not been answered yet. We will be capturing those and answer as much as possible in a blog post later. Thank you again.
Yes, and thank you, and remember that your feedback can make it all better and make EOSC better. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.